Hey guys, tonight we're taking a stroll through a world where luxury meant something entirely different. Imagine living in a castle, but instead of modern plumbing, your bathroom looks like a scene straight out of a medieval nightmare. Yep, no flush toilets, no running water, just you, a chamber pot, and a serious risk of becoming a character in your own dark comedy. Before we dive in, hit like if you love stories that make you grateful for your fancy modern bathroom, and let me know in the comments if you've ever had a less than royal experience. Now dim the lights, maybe get a bucket ready, and let's step back in time to see what life really looked like when hygiene was a whole different ballgame. In the quiet highways of Eldermere, the massive stones of Castle Greykeep cast long shadows as young Aldrich approached its silent gates. The towering walls, weathered yet proud, had an air of waiting for stories, waiting for water, waiting perhaps for a better day. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the soft shuffle of feet from busy servants, their voices low and hurried, yet somehow still gentle against the cool stone floors. It was a place of grandeur, no doubt, but also a place where the most pressing issue was a simple matter of getting water where it needed to go. The absence of pipes, of any visible means of transport for water, was a silent irony that lingered in every hall like a faint echo of a forgotten convenience. Aldrich soon discovered that each day was a small, deliberate puzzle. How to carry water from the river to the kitchens, down dark, narrow stairs, with buckets that sometimes splashed and sometimes refused to fill completely. The clang of metal and the splash of water were familiar sounds here, yet tinged with a quiet frustration that the walls seemed to absorb rather than echo. The servants moved with practiced patience, their faces blurred by shadow or the warm flicker of torches, silent witnesses to this slow ballet of necessity. At times, Aldrich wondered whether the castle's grandeur rested solely on its stones, or if the true weight was kept in these unspoken struggles for daily comfort amidst the absence of modern pipes. In the midst of these daily rituals, Aldrich couldn't help but notice the ironic calmness that settled over the place, a kind of resigned humor in the way everyone adapted. The grand hall often filled with the soft murmur of water pitchers being filled, or the gentle neglect of a neglected fountain that never quite flowed as expected. The old damp stones bore witness to many such mundane efforts. The castle was a monument to perseverance against mundane inconveniences. Even sacred symbols, their faces clouded and indistinct, seemed to watch without judgment as life in the castle went on with a soft, unhurried rhythm. The missing pipes, a quiet background hum of human imperfection. With time, the routine became a kind of serenity, simple, predictable, and quietly accepted. The sun, setting low outside the narrow windows, cast a gentle amber glow that softened the austerity of stone and wood. Aldrich sat by the hearth one evening, watching the flickering shadows, pondering how these small efforts held the castle's pulse. The water, still taken for granted in many places, here was a human act carried, poured, spilled, and loved for its necessity and minor imperfections. The castle's silence, once felt sharply, now seemed more like a gentle lullaby, whispering that perhaps the most enduring strength was in the patience to wait, and the humor to endure what could not be fixed quickly. Reflecting on his arrival, Aldrich saw the castle not as a monument of stone, but as a quiet testament to human resilience, an imperfect sanctuary that thrived not on flawless infrastructure, but on simple acts and enduring humor. The walls, the servants, even the absent pipes, all were part of a slow human story, a reminder that progress often comes in small, unseen moments. As the highlands settled into night, the castle rested neither proud nor defeated, simply still, quietly watching the stars flicker through narrow openings, a gentle symbol of both endurance and gentle irony in the face of timeless human imperfection. As summer's warmth gently seeped into the stone walls of the castle, the well beneath the courtyard began to whisper its decline. Water levels receded slowly, almost imperceptibly, leaving the chamber damp and quiet. Mistress Brienne, the cook, glanced anxiously at the small basin of declining liquid, her hands resting on her hips as she wondered how long the dwindling supply might last through another hot day. Outside, the stone-flagged paths reflected the sunlight, while the distant hum of idle workers barely disturbed the calm, sleepy air inside the hearth-warmed halls. It was a quiet reminder that even the simplest needs, the touch of cool water, demanded patience, and a gentle acceptance of nature's slow, unhurried pace. But as the days grew warmer, tensions cloaked the castle's corridors when Garrick, the blacksmith, and Mistress Brienne found themselves eyeing the same limited source with a touch of wary humor. Garrick grumbled softly, his calloused fingers brushing the small puddle at the well's base, while Mistress Brienne stood nearby, weighing how much water remained for the evening stew versus the chamber pots. A thin, ironic smile appeared on their faces as they exchanged knowing glances, one silent acknowledgement of the quiet spectacle of scarcity. The gravity of their shared predicament, though still distant from despair, was enough to soften the edges of their usual banter, wrapped in the ironic quiet of necessity. Meanwhile, the Lord's Council, seated around a heavy wooden table in the dimly lit hall, debated the proposed renovations and water collection methods that now seemed extravagantly out of reach. The Lord's face, often blurred by the afternoon shadows, was calm but distant, as he barely stirred from his light recline. Voices drifted softly, some coded in hopeful plans, others weighed down by the realization that the castle's treasury had little to spare. The slow rhythm of polite disagreement and reluctant compromises seemed to echo the waning water below, both unfolding without urgency, merely drifting from one whispered word to the next, like the gentle drip of a forgotten tap. Over time, the well's quiet struggle became a backdrop rather than a crisis. Life in the castle had adopted a calm acceptance as the days stretched onward. Mistress Brienne arranged pots with deliberate care, her movements slow and practiced, while Garrick, moments later, unscrewed an old, creaking bucket, lowering it gently into the dark depths. The muted sounds of these small acts, the splash of water, the clink of metal, carried a sense of quiet dignity. Amidst the slow turning of mundane activities, there was an unspoken recognition that everything good, even the simplest comfort like water, required patience and a gentle respect for life's natural limits. Reflecting in the cool shadows of the common hall, one might notice that even hardship, when faced with silent endurance, becomes strangely ordinary. The castle, with its tired stones and quiet routines, seemed to hold stories of human imperfection, sketched in the softened faces of workers, and their unspoken understanding that some days simply flow like the slow drip of water, unrushed and inevitable. The blurred face of the prophet, often seen in fleeting glimpses by the torchlit wall, seemed to remind no one of divine intervention, but of the humble resilience of daily life. As dusk settled softly over the castle, the lingering truth was clear. Life's small demands, like water, teach patience, and perhaps even a little humor in the softly ongoing story of human endurance. In the quiet hours of early dawn, Aldrich stood on the castle battlements, gazing out over the courtyard with a faint smile. His hands rested on the stone parapet, and he gently rubbed the worn edges of a faded parchment where he had sketched plans for rain catchers long ago. Life inside these thick walls, without modern plumbing, had woven routines from simple resources: water fetched from a distant spring, the soft drip of rain collected into wooden barrels. His thoughts lingered on the oddities of human ingenuity, on how mere buckets, wooden channels, and clever arrangement could sustain daily needs. There was a certain peace in these modest acts, nothing flashy, just life unfolding slowly, as it always had for generations past. As the days stretched on, tensions slowly crept into the routine Myra. The eccentric inventor, treading around with her half-finished contraptions, muttered about perfecting the wooden aqueducts amid the clang of tools. The children, eager but uncertain, learned to carry water from the spring, their small arms straining against the weight, feet slipping on uneven stones. Sometimes the rain catchers splashed with muddy water, dripping silently in the breeze, their imperfect shapes a source of quiet frustration and reluctant humor. The castle's walls echoed with the distant sound of rushing water and the children's muffled conversations, blending the practical with the absurd. It was a fragile system, held together by stubborn human patience and the silent hope for a better way. Irony settled softly among the inhabitants as Myra's inventions, ambitious and eccentric, either worked too well or not at all, often spilling rainwater or draining too quickly. The communal bucket system, a patchwork of planks and ropes, often tilted or spilled, providing a reminder of human imperfection amid the effort to tame nature. Occasionally, the blurred face of the prophet moved at the edge of a shadowy corridor, unseen, but somehow always watching, perhaps amused by the scene of stone and water. The children's laughter, now a steady background hum, echoed between the stone halls, fussing over their tasks, learning resilience through trivial frustrations. It was all so ordinary, yet each small failure carried a quiet, ironic dignity. In time, a gentle calm settled like dusk over the castle. Myra's creations, though crooked and uneven, found their place amidst the everyday life water flowed, albeit sometimes too slowly or with splashes. The children no longer only fetched from the spring, but helped to repair the battered buckets and tweak the wooden pipes, their hands becoming steady and familiar with effort. The rough-hewn system, with all its quirks, became a quiet, unassuming part of daily life, much like the slow, rhythmic pulse of a human heart. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the stone walls, while inside, life went on quietly simple, imperfect, and true in its honest resilience. Looking back, it seemed that within these humble efforts lay a kind of human dignity, an acceptance of flaws wrapped in patience and humor. Aldrich, now seated in his chair, often watched the children as they played by the buckets, their small faces lit by the gentle flicker of evening firelight, the village's bird songs, and the faint drip of water from the worn rain catchers spoke of a life unadorned but quietly full. There was a soft humor in their modest struggles, a reminder that despite all attempts at mastery, nature's simple rhythm persisted, and in those quiet hours, one could almost feel the echo of history, friendly, unhurried, and slightly tired, telling stories of human perseverance in the humblest of circumstances. In the quiet dawn of a castle without plumbing, the villagers and guards moved slowly through their routines, the air touching their skin with a faint chill. The makeshift channels they had carved out in the ground carried waste and water away with a modest, reassuring flow, as predictable as a sunrise. There was a simple comfort in knowing that life, despite its inconveniences, went on, small gestures of daily persistence that made the stone walls feel a little less silent. But beneath the calm surface, an unspoken awareness lingered, a fragile trust in the fragile system they had assembled together. For now, everything was in order. The morning passed without incident, and the castle itself seemed to breathe quietly alongside its inhabitants. As the day unfolded, dark clouds gathered overhead, casting dull shadows over the stones and courtyards. The improvised channels began to falter under the weight of the threatening sky, swirling with an anxious, slow-moving unrest. Rain started to fall, first as a gentle patter, then with increasing insistence, hammering against the thatched roofs and stone walls. The channels, overwhelmed by the sudden surge, cracked and spilled their burden into the lower courtyard like an accidental flood. Panic flickered across the faces of the guards and townsfolk, their hope flickering with the failing flow of water. As the once controlled waters turned into a chaotic, rising tide threatening to breach the walls they had so carefully maintained. Amid the rising panic, a peculiar irony surfaced, that of human ingenuity meeting its own limits. Myra, the castle's quiet inventor, stood amidst the chaos, her eyes shadowed behind a blurred veil of light, as she hurried to activate the devices she had crafted with simple, well-worn tools. These odd contraptions, a collection of belts and funnels, were meant to divert water rather than contain it. Yet, in this moment, they became the secret weapon against the flood. Guards and villagers worked together, repositioning Myra's contraptions with mindful patience, attempting to turn the rising tide into something manageable. The humor of it, fighting chaos with devices built from scraps, lurked quietly in the corners of their collective reason, slight and gentle, like a smirk shared in the dark. Gradually, the storm's fury subsided, leaving behind a landscape transformed into a muddy, sluggish mirror of what had been there moments before. The water retreated, pulled back by clever adjustments and shared effort, leaving behind a scent of damp earth mixed with the warmth of human perseverance. The villagers and guards, exhausted but undeterred, cleaned their hands and tools, returning to familiar routines with a calm that felt more like acceptance than defeat. Myra's devices remained in place, humming softly with a gentle promise to hold back the next storm. The castle, impervious to the chaos for now, lay quiet once more under a pale, overcast sky, as if waiting patiently for the next episode of their slow, enduring story. In the stillness that followed, the castle's residents reflected quietly on the ordeal, a reminder of life's unpredictable ebb and flow, both literal and metaphorical. The seemingly mundane act of managing water had revealed their collective resilience, and in the faint light of evening, there was a gentle sense of shared continuity. The event, marked by an ordinary storm and a small human victory, lingered as a muted lesson that even in the most improvised circumstances, humans find a way to adapt, however imperfectly. As they settled into quiet afterthoughts, their faces, blurred behind shadows or soft light, bore no grandeur, just the slow, peaceful acknowledgement that life, like water, always finds its own path, sometimes turbulent, sometimes still, and somewhere, perhaps, the faint smile of the universe watched in gentle amusement. In the quiet of early mornings, the castle stood silent, its stone walls thick and unyielding, yet conspicuously without the gentle trickle of water through modern pipes. The inhabitants, led gently by tradition rather than convenience, relied on rain collection barrels, and the slow, deliberate process of fetching water from distant wells. Every droplet was a small, mindful act, one that imbued routine with a subtle significance, reminding them of water's quiet authority in daily life. There was a certain stillness, a soft patience that settled into the castle's corners, where windows captured the diffuse morning light, and echoes of dripping water became a familiar refrain. The absence of plumbing became an unspoken routine that defined their rhythm, calm, unhurried, resilient. As weeks rolled into months, a faint tension lingered in the air, an awareness that water was a finite gift, one not to be taken lightly. Jars and buckets filled slowly, and strangers might have seen only inconvenience, but within the castle it fostered a quiet vigilance. Walls echoed with muted conversations about rain forecasts and rationing, the small acts of conserving water weaving into daily fabric. Ironies surfaced softly. The very absence of modern amenities made community bonds tighten around shared effort, and strangers on the outside might have called it a hardship, but inside, it cultivated a subtle resilience. Life pressed on with an almost meditative patience, each drop more precious for its scarcity. Then, with a slow, almost amusing irony, the castle's inhabitants began to adapt in ways that would have pleased minimalists or antiquarians. Rain harvesting systems were installed, rudimentary yet effective, while the old wells received careful maintenance. People joked gently about how they had become their own plumbing, filling stone basins and sharing tailies around the hearth. Small sounds filled the air, the clink of buckets, the splash of rain, the murmur of shared effort. Perhaps the most humorous part was that, Without modern plumbing, the castle's inhabitants found a kind of unbroken tradition in patience, forging a quiet dignity from simple, unadorned water movement. Life settled into a manageable, unhurried flow. In the calm that followed, the castle's routines became even more understated, and water, in its modest form, grew into a symbol of resilience and cooperation. The walls, once silent witnesses to countless small struggles, now seemed to hum softly with the humdrum comfort of shared existence. Every drip and drop had become a gentle reminder to respect nature's pace, an unspoken lesson in humility. Aldrich, with his face often blurred by shadow or light, would sit quietly in the courtyard, reflecting on how absence had subtly taught patience, community, and a profound respect for simple flow. The castle's heartbeat was no longer driven solely by iron or stone, but by the steady, silent passage of water from sky to basin. In these slow, reflective days, the castle's story became one of quiet human endurance, a testament, perhaps, to how deprivation can deepen understanding and forge subtle bonds. Aldrich's gaze would drift over the rain-slicked rooftops, and hands busy with careful rationing, he recognized, in the unhurried rhythm, a kind of gentle wisdom. It was not grandeur or sharp innovation that defined their life, but a humble acceptance, a mutual respect for the simplest flow of water. As the seasons continued their steady march, the castle remained a place where resilience was quietly woven into everyday acts, and the true luxury was found in patience. The story, like water itself, moved softly forward, a gentle current of human persistence in a world that seldom hurried. In the quiet seclusion of Castle Ravenswatch, Lady Alina looked out over the stone courtyards as the season's drought deepened, her gaze settling on the ancient well that had served the castle for generations. She called for Master Rowan, the steady-handed mason, whose rough, calloused fingers had once restored and reinforced many of the aging stone structures. Together, they approached the worn, moss-covered well, the water level visibly receding with each passing day, accompanied only by the faint drip of water echoing softly in the hollow darkness. The castle's cisterns, once large and reliable, now showed cracks and dried patches, silent witnesses to time's slow erosion. The rain-catching gutters, designed to harness the mountain's fleeting showers, hung empty and slack, echoing the unspoken worry that winter's harshness would test their imperfect hardiness. As they stood surveying the fragile water sources, a subtle tension settled, an awareness that the supplies they relied on could falter further if rains remained scarce. Lady Alina shifted, her fingers brushing the rough stones of the well's lip as she wondered if they had done enough to preserve these precious resources. Master Rowan, with a quiet sigh, pointed out the weakening cistern walls and the thin, translucent film forming on the surface of the last remaining rainwater, revealing just how near they were to crisis. An irony not lost on either of them, for the castle was built to withstand many things, but not the quiet draining of its life source. The wind already carried a faint chill that hinted at winter's approach, making the simplicity of their water collection seem like a fragile ballet against the looming cold. There was no grand prophecy here, only the slow, almost comical persistence of human effort, filling buckets, patching cracks, and adjusting gutters, each small act a quiet act of faith. Lady Alina half smiled at the sight of her steward fumbling with a rainspout, his hand slipping slightly in the moist air, revealing the imperfect humanity beneath noble titles. Master Rowan's eyes, shadowed by a soft light, examined the old stones and the worn clay, which seemed to whisper their silent, uncelebrated stories of droughts past. The castle's reliance on these aging, humble systems now felt both quaint and absurd, yet undeniably necessary, even as the inevitable winter drew closer, and their makeshift solutions pressed on against the silent, slow passage of time. By late afternoon, a calm had settled as they moved deliberately through their modest routines, charcoal-dusted hands wiping sweat and moisture from brows, eyes softened by familiarity and unspoken understanding. They brushed rainwater from the gutters, tested the faint piping of the cisterns, and listened for the faint resonance of life in the remaining well, even if it was only the echo of past seasons. Lady Alina, with a gentle gesture, traced her fingers along the cracked stone, her gaze distant but peaceful, accepting the quiet perils of survival that each day presented. Master Rowan, sitting on a low wall, looked up at the overcast sky, his face blurred in the diffused light, reflecting the slow, steady endurance that seemed woven into the castle's every brick, from the well to the gutters, from the stone to the sky. Here, in the stillness, it was almost possible to forget the impending winter and simply breathe amid the quiet resilience. As dusk settled over Ravenswatch, the castle's water systems lay quietly waiting, each crack, each bucket, each gutter silent witnesses to human effort and imperfection. Lady Alina paused before retreating into the stone hallways, her hand lingering on the rough surface of a cistern wall, contemplating the fragile balance they maintained. It was a story of endurance, of small, unnoticed acts that held the castle's life in delicate suspension. A reminder that even stone, with all its permanence, depended on the fleeting, fragile gifts of rain and water. And in this gentle, unassuming rhythm, the castle's quiet resilience endured, a soft testament to the quiet human hope that beneath the weight of stone, life might just persist, if only just enough. In the quiet morning hours of the castle grounds, Master Rowan gathered his small team around the aged well, its stone lining cracked and darkened with time. The air was cool, but still, filled with the faint dripping of water echoing from deep within. They set their wooden buckets in rhythm, gently lowering them into the earth's slow, patient embrace, hopeful that today the well might yield a little more. The workers, tired but determined, shared quiet glances of familiarity in the slow process of digging and clearing, mindful that even the earth's patience has limits. It was an ordinary task, yet there was a silent dignity in tending to something so elemental, an unspoken acknowledgement that water, like hope, must often be worked for in quiet moments of persistence. As the days stretched on, the soil beneath the well grew rocky and uncooperative. Every swing of the pickaxe met with stubborn resistance and a rising sense of unease. Rumors from distant lords' spies began to drift through the castle, whispers of a cursed water source twisting downwards into darkness, an ancient superstition that seemed to seep into the minds of the workers and nobility alike. Master Rowan, eyes shadowed by a battered hat, watched the slow chaos unfold, knowing that every collapse, every rock that blocked their passage, threatened to end their task altogether. The once straightforward effort now felt tangled in unseen fears, as if the earth itself conspired to refuse them sustenance. Yet, amidst this tension, the engineers devised a new pulley system, a mechanical whisper of hope that offered a measure of control in uncertain times. With the makeshift pulley in place, the labor resumed, but the ground betrayed them again, this time with a sudden, jarring collapse that sent debris tumbling, and a few laborers stumbling back, dusty and shaken. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the faint scrape of stone and the muffled groans of the fallen earth. Rumors now incubated further in whispers that the water source was cursed, a dark jest spun by unseen enemies, adding a layer of irony to their slow, hopeful efforts. Rowan's face, shaded by an old leather cap, remained calm, though his hands trembled slightly as he reassessed the situation. In the quiet aftermath, everyone understood that perhaps the earth hadn't denied them entirely, only delayed their prize, a reminder of nature's indifferent patience. Despite setbacks and whispered fears, the crew pressed on, adapting their tools and strategies, finding comfort in their shared stillness and routine. The well's depth grew slowly, dark and cool, embodying a patience that seemed both infuriating and strangely serene. During quiet moments, Master Rowan often paused to stare into the developing pool below, contemplating the earth's silent stubbornness and the small human effort to coax life from it. The rumors of curses faded into the background, replaced by a kind of resigned acceptance, an understanding that water, like many human endeavors, simply required time and gentle persistence. In this slow dance with the earth, the castle's people found a measure of peace in the mundane act of waiting quietly, as if nature's gentle indifference was its own form of reassurance. Long afterward, as the well finally deepened beyond the rocky labyrinth, there was a quiet sense of quiet triumph, tinged with gentle irony. The earth had tested their patience, offered its depths slowly and without fanfare. Rowan stood beside the edge, the wooden beam creaking softly under his grip, and watched the dark water ripple gently in the cool dusk light. The rumors of curses remained unproven, but the true lesson was in the slow, unyielding effort. Water was a quiet gift, best appreciated in patience and humility. The castle's water source, a simple well, now life-giving and dependable, reminded all that sometimes even the earth's apparent silence reveals its strength, and in that stillness, human effort found a quiet, enduring peace, an acceptance of human imperfection and life's slow, measured rhythm. In the quiet moments of dawn, the castle's courtyard was still, shadows stretching lazily over the uneven stones. Lady Eleanor, eyes half closed yet determined, watched the masons labor beneath the crumbling archways, their tools clinking softly against rough-hewn oak frames, with the well often running dry, and too many echoes of unreliable promises. She decided to turn her gaze downward, where hidden stone chambers could hold the precious rainwater. The idea of collecting rain from the battlements seemed simple enough, yet ambition, and whether often danced to different tunes. Every brick laid was a small act of hope, a subtle assertion that life could persist even in the quiet, impermanent shadows of stone and earth. As the new cisterns took shape beneath the great hall, the air grew thick with dust and anticipation. The masons worked in slow, deliberate rhythm, their hands stretching and pausing as they carved channels from the battlements, trying to catch each passing droplet. The castle's occupants went about their days, unaware of the test coming soon. How a single summer storm might reveal both the strength and the fragility of this fragile supply. The first signs of rain approached with an unusual calm. Distant clouds crept closer, muffling sounds and darkening the sky in a gentle graying. Then, with a low rumble and distant crack, the heavens opened, unleashing a torrent that quickly turned the courtyard into a churning pond, exposing crevices in the newly formed stonework. The storm's unexpected fury brought a wash of muddy water into the courtyard, splashing against the low walls and flooding parts of the emerging cisterns. The workers paused, some casting annoyed glances at the skies, while others hurried to cover the channels with cloth or wood, trying to minimize the damage. It was quietly ironic. After all their careful planning, the first rain tested not just the capacity, but the resilience of their work. Small cracks in the stone revealed themselves, some newly formed, others older and hidden by dirt and time. The castle's quiet inhabitants looked on in mild, almost bemused silence, knowing that human effort often seemed to struggle against natural caprice. The hidden fissures were a stark reminder. Even when built with care, every plan bore the mark of imperfection and patience. Once the storm subsided and the clouds drifted lazily away, a calm settled back over the castle. The water in the courtyard slowly receded, leaving behind a thin sheen reflecting the softened light of early evening. The workers, tired but undaunted, inspected their work with gentle shrugging shoulders, understanding that these small failures were part of the ongoing, quiet dialogue between human will and nature's patience. Lady Eleanor watched from her chamber window, her face softened by the dim glow of the setting sun, reflecting quietly on the modest resilience of stone and rain. The cisterns, however flawed, had captured some water, fragile, yet real, an imperfect promise that life within these walls might endure. No matter how subtle the cracks, there was a certain serene dignity in their slow, imperfect process, much like the aging castle itself, steadily surviving, quietly waiting for dawn. As night fell, the castle grew still, harboring the faint hum of memories and small human endeavors. The cisterns, filled with murky rain, lay beneath the hall, quietly awaiting their next test, an unlikely monument to human hope wrapped in stone and water. Perhaps in these simple acts of collecting rain, there was a quiet lesson that resilience often belongs to what endures, not what is perfect, but what persists through cracks and delays. Lady Eleanor's silent reflection lingered, knowing well how the slow patience of stone and water mirrored her own quiet journey. The castle, with all its modest imperfections, continued to stand waiting, watching, and quietly enduring beneath a sky that might let loose another storm, or simply drift into calm. And so, life went on, unremarkable in its perseverance, quietly whispering the subtle irony of human effort in the slow rhythm of time. In the quiet hours before dawn, the castle's water supply was quietly relied upon. Wells burrowed into the earth, cisterns stored rainwater, and wooden aqueducts carried water with gentle purpose. It was an ordinary certainty, one hardly noticed outside the soft sounds of dripping and distant footsteps. When the enemy began their relentless siege, their catapults aimed not only at walls, but also at the water sources, trying to poison what sustained the castle's life. A tense stillness settled over the courtyard as the defenders watched dark clouds gathering with uncertain hope. The familiar scent of damp stone and the faint hum of anticipation filled the air, blending tradition with the quiet dread of conflict. Suddenly, heavy rains arrived unexpectedly, turning the rainy season's delay into an ironic blessing. The cisterns started to fill and overflow, while the siege raged on, threatening to burst their stone containers. Master Rowan, observing the chaos, moved with calm purpose, his face obscured by a shadow, as always, in the half-light of the stone vault. He quietly instructed the workers to redirect the excess water through concealed channels, knowing well that flooding the enemy's engines might buy crucial time. The water spilled over in small streams, pooling and swirling around hidden corners, not quite the catastrophe the attackers had hoped for. Instead of chaos, there was a strange, slow harmony, water flowing where it was meant to be, buffering the castle's defenses in a quiet, non-typical fashion. It was a moment of quiet irony, the so-called flood now serving a dual purpose, at once an obstacle to the enemy and a source of fresh water for the castle. The defenders, noticing the unexpected turn, looked at each other with mild, unspoken amusement. Their plans had turned somewhat against the logic of war. Rowan's ingenuity, hidden behind a simple curtain of water, offered a peculiar sense of calm amid tension. The once fragile cisterns now brimmed with a mixture of rain and overflow, their surfaces catching the dull light of the overcast sky. With the threat of poisoning waning, a peaceful patience settled over the fortress, the battle becoming less about violence and more about holding on to the fragile, fleeting comfort of water. As the hours passed, the siege settled into a strange rhythm. The rain continued to keep the water level steady, and the men within the walls found a faint, reassuring rhythm in small daily routines. Some sat aboard the stone battlements, watching the water run in slow streams. Others repaired minor damages with quiet gestures. The blurred, unseen faces of prophets and their silent guidance seemed distant, as the calm interior of the castle remained unchanged. Rowan, now watching the water's gentle flow, murmured softly to himself, feeling the small, undeniable power of human resourcefulness. Outside, the attackers' voices lost some of their menace, replaced by the soothing, patient hum of rain and water, its slow persistence, a quiet lesson in resilience. Looking back, the siege's strange twist reminds us how fragile human plans are, how even the most mundane of resources, water, can shift in meaning under pressure. The flooded cisterns and hidden channels became a subtle testament to this quiet human effort, an ordinary act turned slightly ironic in a moment of crisis. As peace returned, the castle's water system remained a humble, enduring testament to centuries of careful, imperfect engineering, an uncelebrated miracle of patience and quiet ingenuity. In the stillness that followed, it was perhaps easiest to see how life, like water, tends to find its way through small cracks and unnoticed pathways, slowly shaping the stories we call history. Yet beneath it all, the human hand persists, willing, quietly clever, imperceptibly resilient. In the stillness before dawn, the castle's water supply seemed like a quiet promise, wells dug deep into the earth, their stones worn smooth by generations. Waiting patiently, the inhabitants often went about their mornings with a sense that this humble resource was enough, a silent backbone to their daily lives. As the first light touched the stone walls, a gentle breeze stirred the surface of the cisterns, which stored rainwater collected from discreet rooftop channels. The air carried a faint, metallic scent from the underground wells, grounding each breath in the certainty of constant, if modest, provision. It was as if the castle wall knew that water, much like time, moved slowly, quietly reminding everyone of their shared reliance. Then came the day of the siege, a slow, tense theater. Banners hung limply, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed without conclusion. The defenders, seated by flickering torches, measured their supplies, aware that the water they drew was not endless. The rain had ceased for days, and the cistern's level had dipped lower, whispering of vulnerability. Ironically, in the midst of heightened alertness, they often paused to check the humble pipes, or to scrape moss from the stone edges, small acts of routine in times of stress. The water seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, much like the faint hope that the encroaching enemy might turn away. The castle's entire future seemed to hinge on this slow, ceaseless flow, or its momentary halt. When the siege finally lifted, the castle was left with tiny scars, clogged pipes, cracked plaster around the cisterns, and the faint smell of dust carried through unsealed cracks. Yet, amidst the quiet aftermath, a strange sense of irony lingered. The very efforts that had once been seen as mundane, reinforcing bricks, sealing leaks, and sharpening tools became symbols of resilience. The water systems, once taken for granted, now seemed like miniature miracles, forged in patience and necessity. Lady Eleanor, sitting in the weak afternoon light, began meticulously recording these methods, her hand tracing the familiar shapes of the stone, the curves of the water channels. Through her careful notes, the castle's silent mastery over water became a quiet legacy, durable as the fortress walls themselves. In the calm that followed, the castle's water systems settled into gentle routines, rain harvesting during brief showers, routine checks on the well's depth, and minor repairs to the cistern defenses. The hum of daily life resumed softly, with villagers and protectors alike observing the flow of water as a shared, unspoken truth. Lady Aliner's writings faded into the library's quiet corners, a gentle reminder that knowledge of simple needs often carried the greatest weight. The water, now more predictable, seemed almost to hum with a patient rhythm, echoing the slow turn of seasons. It was as if humanity, in its small and forgettable acts of care, had quietly woven sustainability into the very fabric of their stone refuge. In the end, as generations passed, and the castle stood undisturbed, its water supply became more than just a means of survival. It became a symbol of silent perseverance. Lady Aliner's careful record, sealed and stored, glowed faintly with the soft warmth of the past, a reminder that mastery over scarcity was rooted in mundane discipline. The water, flowing through cast iron pipes and carved stone gutters, whispered stories of patience and humility, of small human acts adding up over time. Now, in the gentle quiet of memory, the castle still waits, its thirsty stones finally at ease, quietly knowing that resilience is often built in the stillness of everyday acts, as mundane as a drip or a drop. Beneath the heavy stone walls of Castle Ravenshold, the quiet rhythm of daily life unfolded with a certain patience. Master Steward Aldrich, eyes rimmed with years of quiet observation, gently explained to the young squire Rowan the purpose of the towering guardrobes that poked out from the castle's shadowy corners. With a slow gesture, he outlined the hidden latrines tucked away from the main halls, their simple wooden seats a silent testament to medieval practicality. The air inside was often cool, the sounds of distant conversations mingling with the faint drip of water from the nearby fountain, anchoring the day in unremarkable routine. It was, after all, these humble fixtures that kept the fortress functioning, even as their quiet existence hovered just beneath the edge of notice. As days passed, the keep's peaceful exterior was tinged with concern. Rumors of a mysterious fever in neighboring lands drifted into the castle's stone corridors, weaving through the courtyards and echoing softly into the night. The court, once engaged in feathered parchment debates and games of war, now pondered the invisible threat, disease lurking, unbidden, in places unseen. The courtiers' faces appeared more contemplative, shadows flickering across their features as they speculated quietly, though the keep's daily tasks continued footsteps on stone, soft voices at the hearth. The tension was palpable in the gentle silence that accompanied their whispers about sanitation and the risks of contamination. In the midst of growing concern, a certain irony quietly settled into the conversation. The very structures designed to keep human waste away from the main living spaces, those tall guardrobes and discreet latrines, also served as potential portals for illness if they were not carefully maintained. Aldrich, with a faint smile hidden in his wise, blurred gaze, often remarked on how the castle's hygienic measures were as much about superstition as practicality. The simple act of flushing and the occasional forgotten brush became points of subdued humor among the servants, as if the castle itself was in on some quiet joke about human vulnerability. Life's delicate balance of order and chaos whispered softly through these mundane corners, reminding everyone that safety was a fragile thing. Over calm mornings, as dust motes danced in the filtered light, there was a certain serenity in the way the castle's residents interacted with their daily routines. Squire Rowan watched Master Aldrich tend to the small, dirty tools of sanitation, brushes, spatulas, and pails, each carefully scrubbed and returned to their places. Outside, the sun cast a warm, forgiving glow across the stone walls, as if reassuring everyone that time moved slowly, and so must they. The fever in neighboring lands seemed distant, just another quiet possibility that might someday creep in, or perhaps not. There was a gentle, almost resigned harmony in this awareness, an understanding that human imperfection, no matter how carefully managed, remained a soft, enduring truth. Eventually, the keep settled into its slow, unchanging rhythm, the distant threat of disease blending subtly into the background of its stone-bound existence. Aldrich and Rowan, like many others, accepted that some risks could only be managed through routine and patience. Their faces, softly illuminated by the fading light, reflected a quiet acknowledgement of life's small absurdities, how human efforts to control the world often orbit around the mundane, the overlooked. Within these quiet walls, amid the weight of history and fleeting fears, life persisted unchanged, imperfect, and gently humorous in its silent resilience. And so, the castle remained, a tiny testament to human persistence amidst the slow, unremarkable flow of time. In the quiet corridors of the castle, Aldrich led Rowan through shadowed chambers where the primitive wooden chutes disappeared into the darkness below. The air was thick with a faint dampness, and the faint echo of dripping water seemed to underline the slow, unhurried reality of sanitation in their time. As they gazed at the simple, rough-hewn stone openings, the castle's ancient waste management system felt both functional and faintly humorous in its stubborn primitiveness. Waste flowing down the cliffside with minimal ceremony. Rowan's eyes traced the uneven lines, sensing the silent patience of centuries, passing with only basic technology and human effort. The scene was a quiet reminder that even on the grandest castles, human upkeep remained stubbornly humble, a daily routine that refused to be glamorous, but was vital nonetheless. As they moved deeper into the castle's behind-the-scenes network, the tension thickened when Aldrich pointed out the communal latrine chambers. A large, echoing space filled with simple wooden seats and faint smells of earth and old wood. These chambers doubled as storerooms, where supplies and tools were stacked precariously close to the sewage, a reality that kept both the castle's hygiene and humor in a delicate balance. The faint creak of wooden benches and the distant murmur of other workers underscored the shared burden of sanitation, a task that no one truly wanted to talk about, but everyone relied upon. The irony was stark. Public comfort depended on hidden, unglamorous spaces that were easy to overlook and even easier to forget. It was a quiet testament to human resilience, turning inconvenience into routine with a matter-of-fact shrug. In the corner of the chamber, a traveling monk, his face blurred by a halo of evening glow, quietly warned them of unseen dangers, contaminated water, unseen microbes taking refuge in the flowing refuse. His voice was soft, almost amused by the persistent human naivety, as he explained how even the most primitive systems could carry unseen threats along with the refuse. Rowan listened, half amused himself, as the monk's words floated in the still air, reminding them that beneath the calm surface of castle life lurked persistent risks, invisible yet persistent. The irony lingered. In an age without modern medicine, their daily waste carried against the tide of nature's quiet, indifferent power. The gentle hum of the castle's life persisted, undisturbed by the shadows of unseen dangers, because humans, in their quiet way, carried on. Later, Aldrich and Rowan sat near the castle's edge, where a small stream, hidden beneath moss and stone, flowed silently past. The water, clear in its gentle ripples, carried away refuse with a slow, unassuming grace. The monk's warnings returned to them in a softer light, as they observed how naturally the stream seemed to accept whatever was cast into it, waste, debris, or hope for renewal. The water was neither cruel nor kind, but simply there, calm, persistent, quietly indifferent. Rowan let the moment settle. In this slow movement of water, in the mundane flow of waste and removal, there was a strange beauty, an echo of human effort to coexist with the natural world. Imperfect, yet somehow resilient. The silent river carried their small, human missteps outward into the vast quietness of the landscape. As the evening settled and the castle grew still, Rowan reflected on the quiet cycle of human waste and sanitation, an unremarked but constant thread woven into everyday life. The primitive chutes, communal latrines, and the unseen yet ever-present river embodied the slow, steady rhythm of human effort to keep their spaces livable. Even if with modest technology and subtle irony, the faint memories of the monks' warnings lingered like a soft echo of caution, an unspoken reminder that beneath ordinary routines lie the quiet challenges of health and survival. Rowan found solace in the calmness of it all, the humility, the imperfection, the subtle humor, because in that slow stream of history, every small act of maintenance mattered more than they often realized. And so, life in the castle moved quietly on, carried forward by the simple flow of waste, and perhaps a touch of quiet human hope. Within the quiet stone corridors of the castle, the day began with a soft sense of routine. Servants moved with small, familiar sounds, clattering buckets, whispers of footsteps on flagstone, the gentle shuffling of cloth. Somewhere nearby, the guardrobes sat silent, their wooden seats darkened with age. In the flickering light of the hearth, the castle healer observed a slight change. A faint, stale smell wafted from the drainage channels, unnoticed but somehow persistent. It was a day like many, yet beneath the calm surface, something subtle was stirring, hinting at quiet currents of imperfection that would soon ripple through the castle's sleepy order. As the days wore on, the air thickened with a less familiar weight. Tense whispers threaded through the stone walls. The healer noticed the guardrobes were clogged, their pipes reluctant to drain, while the latrines within the inner chambers began to overflow with a slow, reluctant flow. The river outside, once a clear and gentle flow of water, appeared strangely dulled, and now carried a faint, unpleasant odor. The Lord, sitting motionless in his great hall, listened to reports with a shadowy suspicion that more was amiss than first met the eye. In the stillness, unspoken fears gathered, as everyone sensed that the castle's fragile balance was on the verge of tipping, though none could quite say why. An almost absurd turn of irony washed over the castle when the healer, examining the source of the unrest, discovered that the ancient cleansing ritual, long considered tradition, had become a farce. The guardrobe's pipes were hopelessly blocked, the latrines brimmed over, and the river's flow stagnated, all seemingly ignored by time's persistent march. The Lord, stoic yet visibly troubled, called for a grand cleansing, an effort to purge the filth in accordance with tradition, even as the healer gently pointed out that knowledge of disease transmission might suggest a different approach, yet tradition held firm, its rituals slow to change, as if stubbornness could somehow keep the unseen danger at bay, leaving everyone to wonder if their efforts would be enough to clear the creeping threat. Days passed in a slow, expectant calm, as the castle settled into a quiet routine of cautious cleaning and silent prayer to unseen forces. The sanitation measures, old-fashioned and inadequate, were now supplemented with hesitant efforts, damp rags, hurried scrubbing, and long-held beliefs, though beneath it all, the shadows of infection lingered. The river flowed sluggishly, carrying not just water, but the faint memory of neglect, the gentle hum of insects filling the air. It was as if the castle itself was sighing, resigned to what little they could do. In these moments of quiet, human imperfection was laid bare, the limits of tradition, the persistence of neglect, and the slow realization that progress sometimes arrives too late to change what has already been lost. Later, as the sun dipped low, casting a soft glow over the aging stones, the inhabitants of the castle sat or moved quietly, mindful of the lessons woven into their daily lives. The healer's quiet voice had been but a gentle reminder, calls for better understanding, less reliance on rituals alone. Somehow, amidst the small, mundane acts of cleaning and the fading echoes of old methods, a subtle hope crept in. Perhaps knowledge, like the slow river, could find a new path. Reflecting on the lingering scent, the cracked pipes, and their tired traditions, they recognized that human resilience, the faint, steady willingness to adapt, remained their quiet safeguard. And so, with calm acceptance, they continued forward, leaving the shadows of ignorance behind, with only a faint wry smile at the gentle absurdity of their endless patience. On a quiet evening, as shadows lengthened across stone walls, the castle's residents went about their routines, unaware that beneath their feet, the dark, tangled network of latrine chutes hummed softly in the cool air. The chamber floors, lined with simple wooden seats, were familiar, yet inevitably stained with the passage of many days' refuse, blending faintly with the smell of damp stone and old earth. In the gloom near the guardrobes, Alderic and Rowan silently checked the seals, their movements slow and deliberate, knowing that the night's calm was but a temporary lull in the castle's quiet cycle of human necessity. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the thick curtains, whispering of the coming storm, a reminder that nature never entirely stayed silent for long. As the clock struck a late hour, an unassuming crack in the wooden venting pipe marked the start of a series of subtle, overlooked dangers. Suddenly, a sharp, muffled crack echoed through the stone corridors as rain battered the castle's roof, and a faint glow flared in the lower chambers. Without warning, A blaze erupted within the shadowy shaft of the latrine chutes, flames licking upward past decayed wood and oxidized metal. In the tense silence that followed, the inhabitants hurried into the cold night, clutching their cloaks against the damp and the smell that grew harsher with every passing minute. Alderic and Rowan, with quiet urgency, hurried to divert the nearby river and seal the choking chutes, their hands trembling slightly as they wrestled with the heavy, charred barriers. The fire was small but insidious, a stark reminder of how fragile the castle's sanitation system truly was, and how easily the unseen threats could ignite chaos. Amidst the tumult, an ironic humanness revealed itself. As the guards fought off the spreading flames, a small cache of rotten food, hidden behind a loose stone, began to emit a foul, puffy cloud that drifted into the damp space. Mixing with the smoke, the air thickened, carrying a faint, sickly sweetness that seemed almost surreal against the crackle of flames and the hurried shouts. The castle's officials, already strained, now faced the irony that their greatest threat was not just the fire itself, but the long-neglected refuse and spoiled provisions seeping from forgotten corners. The workers, eyes half closed in fatigue, joked softly about the castle's delights, unaware that beneath their humor lurked the silent, creeping danger of disease. Even amidst adversity, life persisted quietly, with its small doses of routines and ironies alike. As dawn approached, the smoldering embers cooled under buckets of water, and the castle settled into an uneasy calm. Alderic and Rowan, now exhausted, inspected the damage by pale morning light. The charred chutes and the diverted stream marked as silent witnesses to another minor catastrophe averted. They found the rotten food stash, now partially collapsed, and poured over the mud and rust that surrounded it. Mental notes forming about sanitation and oversight. The castle's inhabitants resumed their routines, the threat momentarily tucked away. Yet the uneasy silence seemed to linger, a reminder that such dangers were woven into daily life, hidden, waiting to surprise. A gentle breeze again stirred the curtains, as if the castle quietly sighed, accepting that human resilience was often just a matter of patience and slow repair. In quiet moments of reflection, those who remembered the night thought about the strange, mundane risks of their world. How a simple chamber of waste and wastefulness could threaten the very walls they depended on. The blurred faces of their forebears, long gone, stirred faintly in their memories, as if they too had once noticed the same insidious cycles of neglect and repair. The castle, resilient or perhaps just stubborn, had endured yet another day, its slow life ticking onward with barely a nod to the unseen hazards that continued to shape it. Here, in these ordinary, often overlooked corners of human settlement, a quiet truth persisted. Safety was less a matter of grand gestures than of patience, constant vigilance, and the humble acknowledgement of one's own imperfections. Life moved slowly, and necessarily so, beneath the watchful eyes of history, tired but steady. In the quiet corridors of Castle Ravenshold, the staff moved with a tentative hope, as the relentless smell of waste no longer lingered in the stale air. The old wooden latrines had long been a source of discomfort and suspicion, their creaking boards and dark depths hinting at years of neglect. When the fire finally died down, revealing clearer skies through battered windows, the Lord took a slow breath, contemplating the many small improvements that might bring momentary relief. A simple decree was issued: new guardrobe designs, regular waste removal, and the construction of a stone-lined moat to safeguard the water. These acts of routine care, sluggish and unassuming, hinted at a quiet longing for health, an escape from the unseen dangers that had quietly accumulated over years. The castle, in its worn grandeur, seemed to nod softly in agreement at the possibility of a cleaner tomorrow. As days unfolded into weeks, the tension of change crept into the everyday shadows. The builders hammered more slowly, and the guards watched the new waste channels with cautious eyes. The guardrobes, once noisy with splinters and splash, now had smoother stone linings, though their smell still betrayed their storied past. Occasionally, a chamberlain would catch a glimpse of the moat's dark waters, and a sense of unease would flicker, warnings of unintended consequences beneath the calm surface. Periodic reminders from the healer about cleanliness added a faint edge of anxiety, though most accepted the effort as necessary. Ironies persisted, despite the grand reforms. The human tendency to overlook small dangers lingered, quietly undermining the progress. Behind the castle walls, life settled into a steady rhythm, one foot in tradition and another in cautious innovation. Some somber hours, a whisper of skepticism floated through the stone halls, as the old worries of disease still seemed to hover just beyond reach. The workers sometimes chuckled softly at the irony of improving what was inherently imperfect, guardrobes built from stone, yet still prone to leaks and odors. Visiting physicians, their faces blurred with the light, spoke in hushed tones about the persistent risk, their words lost amid the hum of distant activity. The water, once thought to be eternally poisoned by the waste above, now seemed marginally safer, but never truly clean. Even amidst these efforts, human folly persisted the assumption that once a system was repaired, the danger vanished. And so, in the quiet, the castle's old fears remained. flickering faintly like a candle, struggling against the dark. Over time, the castle's inhabitants, accustomed to the slow change, began to notice a certain calm settling, as if the fever had indeed receded, or was perhaps just sleeping. The moat shone faintly under the late afternoon sun, its stones rough but solid, an anchor against the unseen threat of contaminated water. The guardrobe improvements had become part of daily routine, mundane and unremarkable, a silent testament to effort made and accepted. The air, while still carrying the subtle scent of old fears, carried also a gentle sense of acceptance, if not complete comfort, reflecting on the days of chaos. The castle's residents found a kind of weary peace in their patience, recognizing that health was an ongoing human endeavor, fragile but worth tending. Perhaps, they thought quietly, the slow work of cleanliness was itself a kind of daily prayer, little and persistent. In these soft moments of stillness, the castle's story becomes one of quiet humility, an acknowledgement that betterment often takes time, patience, and a willingness to accept human imperfection. The blurred faces of old healers and builders had watched over the progress, unseen but present in every stone and every moment of calm. The water now ran clearer, and the air no longer carried the loudest warnings. Instead, there was only a gentle reminder of what had been done and what was yet to be maintained. Life in Castle Ravenshold moved on, slower now, with a softened sense of hope, less about perfect safety and more about small, steady steps toward health. As the shadows lengthened and the evening settled, the castle seemed to breathe quietly, a silent witness to human resilience wrapped in routine and silent irony. In the quiet of the stone-walled kitchen, Master Cook Aldrich watched the flickering flame of the great hearth, its warmth spilling softly onto worn wooden tables. Apprentice Lena, still uncertain but eager, clumsily added more firewood, her fingers brushing against the rough stone and cold metal tools. Without running water, every task required patience. Soaking cloths in pitchers, grinding grain on rough stone wheels that turned with steady, heavy rhythm. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wood, roasted grains, and faint dampness from the stored harvest. It all felt like a slow dance of necessity, a routine carried out in quiet, shared forgiveness of human imperfection. As days passed, a gentle tension settled in. The hearth's flames flickered unpredictably, and Lena sometimes struggled to keep the fire steady, feeling the weight of each ash-laden rung of her efforts. The absence of modern plumbing meant that water was always a limited resource, carried from distant pumps or stored in heavy clay jars, and careless spills threatened to flood the cool cellar floors or encourage mold. The pantry's darkness held its own stubborn secrets. Dried herbs, root vegetables, and seasonal grains stacked in imperfect shelves, reminding them daily of the fragility of order and the subtle chaos of storage. Somewhere behind the blurred faces of prophets hanging on the wall, life's quiet irony rested in their endless, uncelebrated diligence. Every moment was a quiet reminder of human limits, written in dust and ash. Irony lingered in the everyday rhythm. How the heat from the hearth was both comfort and challenge, and the grinding stones often seemed to resist the weight of their own purpose, slowly turning with a tired patience. Lena chuckled softly to herself as she accidentally knocked over a shallow tray of spilled flour, watching it settle like a soft blanket over the cold stone. Aldrich's face, shadowed and blurred by the low light, appeared to smile with exhausted amusement, knowing well how human plans often dissolved into small messes. The kitchen's silence was punctuated only by the muffled crackle of burning wood and the distant drip of water stored in clay jars, simple sounds that marked the slow passage of a day wrapped in ordinary toil. And yet, amid the humble chaos, life persisted in gentle humor and patient persistence. With time, the familiar rhythm settled deeper into their bones. Lena grew more attuned to the hearth's subtle glow and the grain's coarse texture, finding a strange comfort in the repetition. She watched the shadows dance across the worn brick walls, her fingers tracing the patterns of flour or the uneven grain of dried beans stored nearby. Aldrich's steady, deliberate movements became a quiet meditation, and the unhurried effort of keeping the pantry dry and orderly offered moments of peace in their shared toil. The forgotten faces of prophets, now softly illuminated, seemed to witness their quiet perseverance. In these slow days, the burden of absence, of running water, and instant ease melted into a tranquil acceptance that felt oddly restorative, like the evening settling over a long day. Later, in the calm stillness, Lena reflected on the humble simplicity of their daily lives, how patience, moderation, and humor quietly sustained them in a world without modern comforts. The cool cellar, with its modest stacks of season's harvest and the steady warmth of the hearth, offered a gentle reminder of human resilience. The blurred faces of prophets seemed, in a way, to endorse their modest routine, their silent oversight timeless and distant. Here, amid the sounds of crackling wood and soft footsteps, life was a slow, ongoing story, neither triumphant nor tragic, just human, as soft and enduring as the stone walls themselves. For all its quiet irony, it was enough in its own thoughtful, imperfect way. In the quiet stillness of early summer mornings, Aldrich stood before the large, weathered wooden doors of the pantry, eyeing the empty shelves with a trace of concern. The drought had crept in slowly, stealing moisture from the earth, and leaving the usual abundance of meat and dairy suddenly scarce. It was a moment of quiet acceptance, as lined hands traced the pattern of the cracks in the stone walls, knowing well that reliance on simple methods would now be their safeguard. The air carried a faint scent of hay and damp earth, promising both challenge and the chance for ingenuity. For now, it was just another day, steadily unfolding, as human patience and practicality prepared to meet the tests ahead. As the weeks stretched on without rain, tension gradually blended into a pragmatic resolve. Aldrich commissioned sturdy oak barrels, sealing them with a thick layer of wax, the cool touch of timber reassuring in contrast to the dry, sun-baked world beyond. On the battlements, he fashioned a rain-catching cistern, an awning of rough-hewn wood and leather straps, hoping that even the rare thunderhead might bring a precious few gallons. Lena, meanwhile, learned to shear and salt the meat at just the right moment, her hands moving carefully to avoid spoilage, while the air filled with the faint aroma of smoldering wood from the smoker. These acts of adaptation, born from necessity, subtly shifted the kitchen's reliance from convenience to discipline, patience, and careful craftsmanship. Yet, amid these earnest efforts, irony found its way into the routines. They had stored their bounty in barrels sealed with wax, only to discover small leaks weeping from the imperfect joins on humid nights that seemed impossible amid the drought. Lena chuckled softly as she balanced trays of layered root vegetables in the cool earth, laughing at the notion that, beneath the stubborn dry sky, the simplest answers still held the greatest surprise. Sometimes the rain fell in just enough drizzle to renew hope, only to disappear again before dawn, leaving everyone to marvel at nature's quiet irony. The cistern's slow fill offered a muted comfort, a reminder that even in hardship, human smallness could meet the world's indifference with quiet resilience and a gentle humor. Gradually, the atmosphere settled into a calm rhythm as days lengthened and the air grew thick with waiting. The cool darkness of the cellar became a haven where meat hung quietly, slowly curing. Lena's layered vegetables sat in the earth, waiting for the coming cold. Aldrich's barrels, now seasoned and tested, offered a faint reassurance in their dark, humming silence. The constant hum of the cistern trickling is the faint clink of tools. These details became part of the steady, unhurried life. Perhaps, in the end, the true value was in learning to wait, learning that persistence, silent effort, and a touch of irony could sustain life in a world that refused to obey convenience or expectations. In the quiet reflection of later days, the villagers, Aldrich, Lena, and all who shared their modest toil, found a gentle wisdom in the simple acts of preservation. The barrels, the earth-layered vegetables, the raincatcher, they all told a story about human humility. No grand inventions or miracles had helped them through this season, just small, constant acts of care. As sunlight bled softly into the horizon, the everyday resilience endured, quietly asserting that human life, however ordinary or absurd, had its own quiet dignity. Their story was woven into the slow, unassuming rhythm of the land, a testament to patience, adaptation, and the gentle irony of trying to control what was intrinsically uncertain. In the quiet shadows of the castle's storied kitchens, the cooks moved with deliberate patience, aware that the siege outside had begun to thin their supplies. Bowls clinked softly against rough wooden tables, and the scent of stale bread mingled with the faint echo of water dripping from hidden pipes. As hunger settled like a dull weight, there was a strange comfort in the familiar routines, measuring, stirring, and hiding away details of personal hardship. The pantry's secret chambers, long a sanctuary for dried herbs and preserved root vegetables, now held a fragile hope, and so a quiet understanding grew among the kitchen folk. Survival meant patience, quiet effort, and a kind of humble vigilance amidst the mounting silence of the castle walls. Days passed slowly, and the tension inside the kitchen tightened like a bowstring. Yet the cooks persisted in their cautious routines. Rumors slipped through cracks in the heavy stone walls, whispers of dwindling grain and growing scarcity. But no one spoke with certainty, only exchanged looks and cautious nods. The stalemate outside made everyone acutely aware of each small decision. Each leftover slice of bread repurposed into a thin, gruel-like pottage that tasted of patience as much as of hunger. In the dim corner of the storeroom, an old cook sketched a makeshift water wheel, lifting rainwater from a hidden cistern, all the while watching for signs of spies, eyes lurking beyond the door's creak. It was a quiet game of caution, played out in the flickering shadow of mounting restraint. Amidst the slow exhaustion, irony found its way into the daily grind, an endless cycle of rationing and repurposing that veered between hardship and dark humor. Bread crusts became tiny crusty pies, and meager root vegetables softened into weak, oddly comforting broths. Small acts of ingenuity to outwit the slow march of hunger. Behind the closed pantry doors, someone chuckled softly at the thought of prophets whose faces remained blurred, unseen, much like the faces of those who silently bore the burden of waiting. Outside, The rainwater wheel turned with a gentle, monotonous rhythm, an oddly quaint symbol of makeshift hope, while the cooks, with weathered hands, watched it hum like a lullaby of survival. Life, in its quiet absurdity, carried on in these small, unnoticed victories. Weeks drifted by, and a sense of calm seeped into the castle's kitchen corridors, as if the worst had momentarily settled into the background of their daily lives. The soft sounds of stirring pots, the slow drip of rainwater, and the occasional shared glance across a humble table became the only rhythm needed. The pantry's secret chambers remained hidden, a silent guardian of sustenance, as the cooks quietly accepted their shared fate among the scent of stale bread and water-masked herbs. Their faces, once animated with concern, now flickered with a gentle, enduring patience, every wrinkle and smudge telling a story of resilience. It was a slow, peaceful acknowledgement that, amid hardship, life persisted in the smallest, most unremarkable ways, and in the calm after the storm of scarcity, they observed the quiet truth. Human effort, no matter how simple, carries an unspoken dignity. The hours spent rationing, improvising, and guarding their hidden stores became a reflection of resilience, not heroics, merely the gentle persistence of ordinary people. The blurred faces of prophets and the rough textures of their daily toil blended into a shared memory of endurance. As the castle's walls kept their silent vigil, the kitchen's quiet corners held a subtle, enduring humor about their own small, flawed humanity, waiting patiently for better days. Knowing that even in the slowest stories, life quietly endures. In the quiet hours of the early evening, the castle's kitchen lay peaceful, shadows stretching along the stone walls as the hum of the hearth settled into a gentle crackle. Aldrich and Lena moved deliberately, their hands familiar with the routine of preparing long-saved grains, dried herbs, and salted meats, all stored in a pantry that felt like a well-guarded treasure chest. Light flickered softly on their faces, which revealed the weariness of a day spent tending fires and chopping firewood. Still, there was a quiet comfort in their shared task. Outside, the sky was a dusky blur, hinting at the approaching night, while inside, the air remained warm and tinged with the scent of roasted herbs and earthy flour. It was a simple moment of daily life, slow and almost mundane, yet crucial for the life within these stone walls. Suddenly, a faint flutter of sparks danced from an unused corner of the ceiling, then caught a stray ember against a thin patch of dry thatch. The small blaze quickly grew, licking at the timber and fuel stored just above the cooking area. For a moment, there was a fleeting rise of alarm. Aldrich's eyes widened slightly. Lena's hand moved instinctively toward the water basins, But with no modern plumbing or fire apparatus, their options were limited. Outside, the distant sound of rain remained just a vague, uninterested patter, as if the sky had forgotten their plight. They watched in silent anticipation as the flames reached upward, tiny and relentless, against the ancient roof, and a slow, cautious realization settled that this was no ordinary inconvenience. Their breath caught, knowing that every effort must now count, however humble their tools. Aldrich muttered a muted curse, glancing at the stone basins filled with rainwater gathered from the dampness of the castle walls, while Lena, with a hint of irony in her eyes, swiftly remembered the snow stored from the parapets during the winter months. Without hesitation, they scooped the cold, granular snow into leather cups, their fingers numbed by the sudden cold. They poured the snow onto the flames in a deliberate, almost ritualistic manner, trying to smother the fire with a slow, cautious patience that seemed almost absurd given the urgency of the moment. Sand, once carefully stored in the lower kitchen corners, was then dragged out and sprinkled over the blaze, a desperate yet strangely calming gesture. It was a delicate balance, like an ancient dance of fire and water, and as the smoke thickened, they realized how much they relied on these humble, time-worn methods to hold chaos at bay. Finally, after a long, breath-holding interval, a collective sigh swept through the room as the last flicker was subdued and the smoke began to clear. The fire was out, the roof blackened but intact, and the air was thick with the scent of damp stone, snow, and sand. Aldrich wiped his brow with the back of his hand, while Lena chuckled softly at the irony of their improvised firefighting tactics. Cold snow and dry sand, a routine from generations long gone. The mundane relief washed over them quietly. No heroes, no dramatic rescues, just slow, careful cooperation against the slow burn of a single careless spark. Outside, the night pressed on steadily, indifferent to their small battle, reinforcing the quiet truth that survival often hinged on patience, simple tools, and a good deal of luck. They turned back to their work, grateful for the calm that followed, however faint it might be. In the stillness that settled afterward, Aldrich and Lena allowed themselves a moment of reflection. Leaning against the cool stone walls and observing the quiet remnants of their effort, the faint glow of the fire's aftermath cast a softened hue over their faces, which bore the gentle lines of time and quiet understanding. They knew that these small incidents, fire, water, snow, sand, were part of the endlessly repeating dance of everyday life in a castle without modern luxuries. There was no need for heroics here, only a gentle acceptance of the imperfect tools and routines passed down through countless generations. As they began tidying up, acknowledging that tomorrow would bring more small chores and minor challenges, they shared a silent, knowing smile, aptly amused by human stubbornness and the quiet resilience that underpinned their ancient way of life. In the quiet aftermath of the siege, the castle's kitchens stirred once more, sensing the familiar rhythm of daily life returning. Under the pale daylight filtering through small, high windows, cooks and servants set about their tasks, unaware that the darkest days had softened into a slow, forgiving routine. Yet beneath the wooden beams, a new network of underground channels, a subtle, unassuming labyrinth, began to carry the rainwater that had once threatened to drown their hopes. It was an act of patience, an echo of old ingenuity that refused to die with the siege, as though the stone corridors had quietly remembered how to sustain life in times of hardship. Outside, the distant sounds of rustling cloth and chopping, wood pressed softly against the cool stone walls, marking a fragile return to normalcy. The castle, battered but resilient, held onto its quiet legacy of flow, a reminder that even abandoned echoes can nourish what remains. Later, as the seasons pressed onward and the kitchens found their rhythm again, trouble arose, not with the water, but with the human nature of order. Aldrich, once a humble steward, saw his ideas about water and storage become formalized into a new kitchen charter, a document scribbled in careful, steady handwriting, promising to preserve the fragile systems. It was a small act of hope, inscribed alongside recipes and hygiene rules, yet it hinted at a lingering tension, an acknowledgement that even in restored routines, old uncertainties lurk beneath each measured step. Lena, a girl whose face remained shadowed in the low candlelight, stepped into the role of master cook, her hands trembling with the gravity of responsibility. She listened carefully to the faint, steady hum of the channels below, knowing well that her choices now would quietly shape the many meals that sustained their fragile accord. Amidst the gentle clatter of pots, the castle seemed to hold its breath, caught between renewal and whispered worries. In a quiet twist of irony, the town's elders, who once scorned the reliance on underground systems, now praised them in hushed, slightly amused tones, perhaps with a smile that barely reached their weathered faces. The channels, silent and unromantic, continued their unbroken journey beneath the stones, ferrying rainwater with an unassuming steadiness that did not ask for praise. Every drip and trickle echoed softly through the cool corridors, a mundane symphony that sustained their modest existence. Lena's careful stewardship brought a frank sense of pride, that through simple channels and humble effort, they had crafted something resilient and unpretentious, an infrastructure rooted less in illusion and more in quiet perseverance. The castle's history, seasoned with slow humor and patient endurance, seemed to settle into a calm, unhurried rhythm, a reminder that even the simplest acts of care could bear the weight of generations. With time, the castle's daily life acquired a gentle, unshakable calm. The kitchens now operated almost automatically, the underground channels humming softly beneath archways, as if imbued with a silent spirit of endurance. Lena moved among her chefs in her modest apron, her face softly illuminated by the low firelight, content in her quiet dominion. Outside, clouds drifted lazily across the sky, their shadows fleeting over the stone courtyards and empty stalls, casting a subtle, peaceful pallor on the scene. The old stories of danger and chaos faded into the background, replaced by a steady, unremarkable rhythm of preservation. And in this peaceful stillness, the castle's legacy of flow, the inescapable, unnoticed network, became a symbol not of grandeur, but of simple, human resilience grounded in mundane routines. Looking back, the story of water and food in the castle feels like a quiet meditation on human humility. Without the flash of pipes or fancy tools, they relied on patience, modest technology, and everyday acts of care to feed and hydrate a resilient community. The underground channels, now faded into the silent stones, stand as a testament to unpretentious ingenuity, quietly carrying their load beneath the surface. As the years drifted on, the castle's kitchens and pantries reflected an enduring truth that life's sustenance often comes from the unassuming efforts of ordinary hands, working steadily without fanfare. Perhaps the greatest lesson lay not in grand design, but in the slow, quiet flow of water, an unremarkable, yet vital legacy of resilience. And so, beneath the calm sky, the castle endured, quietly feeding its stories into the slow, gentle rhythm of history's silent, enduring flow. In the silent gloom of Lord Aldrich's stone keep, morning arrived with a quiet sense of expectancy. The water cisterns, once full from the winter rains, now sat nearly empty, their rough stones echoing the faint drip of last drops. The steward, with a calm but weary voice, announced that due to a long drought, the usual mingling of water, once freely shared, must cease. Instead, the noble family would drink at dawn, the knights at midday, and the servants only come nightfall. This strict schedule, once a simple matter of convenience, now quietly etched a new hierarchy into the daily rhythm, subtly reinforcing old boundaries. In this calm, everyone moved, each step governed by the unrelenting scarcity of water and the slow march of hours. As days stretched into a dry spell, tensions began to ripple through the fortress, like faint vibrations beneath a still surface. The servants, already burdened with physical toil, found their access to water painfully limited, often touching cold stones or shallow bowls in the dark for solace. The noble family, untouched by the thirst in their grand chambers, watched the shifting order with a quiet, amused detachment. Weariness mingled with a faint sense of irony. The knights, caught between their loyal duties and the growing frustration of the midday drought, moved with measured patience, their armor sometimes clinking softly over cracked stone floors. The unspoken hierarchy, reinforced by the water schedule, grew sharper, less fragile as the well of patience slowly dried up alongside the cisterns. One late afternoon, amid the stillness, a servant accidentally spilled a small gourd of water, and a subtle ripple of humor passed across the quiet hall. The noble family, enjoying their reserved moment at dawn, remained unfazed, their faces blurred by the faint glow of dwindling sunlight. The ironies of life, with prophets' faces hidden in shadows, seemed to hover just out of reach as everyone carried on, a little more subtly resigned. The soldiers patrolled their silent watch, while the cooks, with waterless pots, quietly debated if their work had become more about endurance than nourishment. The rigid schedule, once strictly observed, now was seen by some as a slow comedy of human stubbornness, a daily charade in the face of unavoidable scarcity. By the time evening seeped into the thick stone walls, a sense of calm had settled over the fortress, like a well-worn blanket. The servants, flicking candles among the barrels, descended into a subdued quiet, their faces soft with fatigue, but free from anger. The noble family sat around a heavy wooden table, the light casting gentle shadows on their blunted, relaxed expressions. The water, once a symbol of hierarchy, was now a quiet reminder of shared human limits. The hours ticked by soundlessly, and beneath the stillness, a subtle acceptance grew, an understanding that in this place of stone and silence, resilience might be found not in abundance, but in quiet patience and shared necessity. Looking back, the authority of water had quietly shifted the entire social fabric, not through proclamations, but through the slow, unremarkable march of time and scarcity. The castle's inhabitants, their faces often blurred by the passing days, learned that hierarchy could be both rigid and fragile, vulnerable to the tiniest shift in need. In the end, it was not the grand halls or the silken banners that defined the moment, but the small, everyday acts of waiting, touching cold stones, and exchanging weary glances. As the keep grew even more still, it also grew quietly human, a testament to the slow and subtle endurance of those who, day after day, to live with what they could not change. And so they continued quietly, with the faintest hint of irony, under a sky perpetually waiting for rain. In the quiet hours of dawn, Sir Rowan, the castle's seasoned commander, stood atop the stone battlements, observing the faint glow of the distant well's lantern flickering softly against the early morning mist. His sword rested by his side, but his mind lingered on the slow drip of water from the communal barrels, a precious resource that seemed to mock their discipline with its scarcity. The daily routine was clear: patrol, oversee, and wait, all in the shadow of a limited supply that dictated much of their lives. The castle's social hierarchy subtly layered itself over this simple necessity, with the lowest ranked squire forever tasked with the treacherous trek. Restless yet resigned, Sir Rowan felt the weight of the limited water as a silent, unyielding partner in their daily rhythm, an unspoken reminder of their fragile civilization. As twilight descended and the sun dipped behind the stone walls, tensions quietly grew in the guards' quarters. The squire, barely beyond boyhood, shuffled under the burden of the well's distant location, the worn leather of his traveler's satchel creaking with each heavy step. Murmurs of frustration rose softly among the men. The delay in water meant sluggish patrols and uncertain readiness, tipping the unspoken balance of authority and fatigue. Sir Rowan watched with a tired eye, aware of how each delay amplified the small resentments simmering beneath the surface, like a slow, barely perceptible tide that could swell at any moment. Yet the routine persisted, the unwavering march of duty shadowed by the slow, quiet disappointment that lingered in every breath. In the quiet irony of the castle's routine, the guards' daily hardship became almost a quiet joke, an unvoiced acknowledgement that the noble funneled their discomfort through the lowest of their ranks. The squire, now returning from his morning pilgrimage to the well, smirked with a weary humor that barely masked his growing annoyance, silently wishing for some mundane luxury like a warm bath or a simple cup of ale. Sir Rowan, observing this, found himself quietly amused at human resilience amid absurdity. As the sun's orange hues softened the stone walls and cast long shadows across their tired faces, the distant well glowed faintly in the evening light, a persistent, gentle reminder that even their survival depended on patience and humility. The castle's daily life, with its small acts of endurance and understated irony, moved with slow, measured grace. By nightfall, a calm settled over the silent courtyard. The guard resumed their stations, the distant hum of activity reduced to a peaceful stillness. Sir Rowan, leaning on the cold stone wall, watched the stars begin to emerge through a hazy sky, their faint light casting a gentle glow over the empty, waiting wells. The constant dependence on a single, distant water source had rendered routine into a form of meditative acceptance. Each man's face, softly illuminated by the flickering lanterns, reflected quiet endurance. The frustrations of the day melted into a shared understanding that some burdens are simply woven into the fabric of daily life, inevitable, unchangeable, yet manageable in their slow, unremarkable way. Here, in this quiet hour, human resilience whispered softly beneath the weight of their humble hardships. As the castle settled into the gentle rhythm of night, Sir Rowan allowed himself a moment of gentle reflection, perhaps quiet humor, about human nature's enduring patience in the face of absurd necessity. The well, with its elusive promise of water, remained just beyond reach, a symbol of their shared endurance and gradual adaptation. The sleep of the castle's inhabitants was calm, undisturbed by grand events or divine intervention. Merely the soft rustling of cloth and the distant drip of water echoing through the stone corridors. Humanity's quiet resilience persisted, as it had through centuries of limited resources, mundane routines, and subtle hierarchies, each day a small testament to patience. Gently the night wrapped around the castle, a peaceful end to a story as old as stone itself, written in the slow, unspoken bonds of human perseverance. In the quiet hours of the castle, Myra, the head cook, often found herself lost in the rhythm of daily life, kneading dough, stirring large pots, and listening to the small, familiar sounds of clinking dishes and breathing servants. Among these mundane routines, a faint sense of waiting lingered in the air, as if something unseen shaped their days more than the visible chores. One afternoon, her tired eyes caught a glint beneath a weathered stone in the pantry, and after cautious investigation, she discovered a hidden spring bubbling softly beneath the floorboards. For a moment, she stared in mild surprise, noticing the cool water that seemed to promise life back into the long, quiet corners of the castle. The notion hovered quietly. Perhaps this small secret could change how they endured their daily sameness. A secret that quietly arrived with the dispassionate breath of history itself. As Myra began to divert water from the spring into the kitchen late at night, the small act grew into an almost meditative ritual. Her hands felt the smooth pebble of the hidden pipe, the faint heartbeat of water streaming beneath her fingertips, an act that seemed both mundane and significant. The servants who worked tirelessly in the cold, dark cellar remained unaware, their tasks unchanged, yet somehow diminished. They starved, while the masters enjoyed feasts, their plates brimming with steaming food. Quiet tensions formed like thin cracks beneath the surface of their ordered lives, unnoticed but persistent. Myra's secret felt like a fragile, silent rebellion, a subtle shift in the invisible hierarchy that defined their daily existence. Meanwhile, the castle's shadows watched without judgment, quietly witnessing the slow emergence of hidden power. Soon, the irony of the situation revealed itself. The very water meant to nourish the castle's foundation was now a quiet symbol of division. The noble hall echoed with laughter and the clink of fine silver, while below, the servants' hunger persisted in silence, absent of the water that might have eased their plight. Myra, aware of her small clandestine act, wondered if anyone else noticed the change or cared. Her secret, once a simple act of necessity, now felt like a quiet comedy of errors, an unnoticed rebellion in a world forgetting its human rhythms. The castle's halls remained grand and serene, unaware of the silent struggle below. In this strange division, the water's unseen flow both sustained and betrayed their fragile order, highlighting how easily the unseen could shift the balance of power. Over time, Myra found a strange calm in her quiet accomplishment, as if the hidden spring had become a part of her own gentle rhythm. The steady, unnoticed pulse of invisible life beneath the stone floors. The castle continued its slow, peaceful course, with the nobles seemingly unaware of the subtle current beneath their feet. The servants, though still hungry, carried themselves with a resigned patience, their quiet suffering softened by the faint knowledge of Myra's secret. In this balance of stillness, the castle's hum seemed to hum a lullaby of human imperfection, a gentle reminder that beneath the grandeur, life was composed of small, everyday acts with complex, often hidden consequences. And as the sun set beyond the stone walls, a sense of quiet reflection settled over the castle, as if whispering that power and subsistence often lingered in the softest of places. Years later, the story of Myra's secret spring became a quiet legend passed among the castle walls, an unspoken acknowledgement of the subtle, unspectacular acts that shape human lives. Perhaps the nobility, lost in their endless pursuits, never considered how much of their comfort depended on unseen, humble efforts. The castle, now bathed in a warm, fading light, stood still in its silent meditation on the delicate balance of daily life, a reminder that history often flows in gentle streams, invisible but deeply felt. As the last shadows lengthened, the quiet hum of human imperfection persisted, whispering softly through the corridors, an enduring tale of minor rebellions, simple survival, and the quiet irony of hidden life beneath ancient stones. In the quiet confines of the castle courtyard, the morning unfolded slowly, with servants going about their routine chores under the soft light, filtering through narrow windows. Among them, Tomas, the charismatic squire, had recently discovered a hidden spring nearby, an unexpected find amidst the stone walls. Initially, it was a quiet secret shared only in hushed whispers, a small comfort in a place where water was always scarce and carefully rationed. The castle's routines depended on the monotony of water fetching and distribution, each movement slow and deliberate. As the day wore on, Tomas's quiet curiosity grew into a gentle question. Why should certain hands have more access than others? But the castle, in its slow, deliberate rhythm, remained unaware of what was stirring beneath its ancient stones. An afternoon breeze brought a subtle change, and with it, tension. Tomas, now emboldened, gathered a few fellow servants and pointed out the spring's location, their voices low but persistent, carrying a faint ripple of challenge through the shadowed corridors. Words spread quietly, almost imperceptibly, but the castle's social hierarchy, the lord, the knights, the officials, began to feel the shift in atmosphere. Lord Aldrich's presence loomed like a distant thunderhead, and he ordered the knights to uphold the existing privileges, their armor faintly gleaming as they arranged themselves across the courtyard like silent guardians of tradition. The servants' voices, low and steady, persisted around the stone fountains and troughs, each plea a small ripple disturbing the calm surface of the castle's daily life. There was a strange humor in the timing. How, for all their careful planning and hierarchy, the issue of a simple spring had become a point of quiet contention. Tomas's group, now gathered in small clusters, laughed softly at the absurdity, how water, one of life's simplest needs, had become a symbol of status and restraint. The castle's official faces, usually blurred or hidden in shadow, remained stern, but Arnaud slowly slipping into a kind of irony. Even the knights, supposed enforcers of order, looked mildly perplexed, shifting their weight and exchanging glance that suggested everyone knew the affair was more about human folly than power. The spring, still hidden, remained a quiet witness to these petty disputes, as if amused by the slow absurdity of it all. As evening settled, there was a new quietness, a kind of slow acceptance. The courtyard's noise diminished into a gentle hum, and the castle's inhabitants retreated into their routines, perhaps with a touch more awareness of their shared human needs. Tomas's group dispersed, stooped and relaxed, their earlier energy softened by fatigue and a faint sense of peace. The castle walls seemed to hold their secrets with a patient, unspoken grace. The line between privilege and equality felt, momentarily, like a slow-moving shadow. Lord Aldrich's knights stood near the gates, their armor not clinking, but resting silent witnesses to the day's small rebellion. Somewhere within, a quiet understanding grew that water, an ordinary gift, would always outlast the fleeting structures of hierarchy. In those late, quiet moments, the story lingered like a faint echo, an example, perhaps, of how even the smallest of human disputes drift into history like a gentle breeze. Tomas and the others had woken a subtle awareness that reordering such simple rites was slow and uncertain, yet undeniably human. It was a story about water, yes, but also about the quiet dignity in shared needs and the slow patience it took to see change. As the last light faded over the stone walls, the castle settled into its usual calm, as if nothing had shifted at all. Yet everything subtly had. And somewhere beyond the castle, a distant prophet's blurred face faded softly into the twilight, watching silently as yet another quiet story unfolded, ordinary, human, and quietly timeless. In the quiet, sprawling cells of the castle, water scarcity had long set a slow, almost meditative rhythm to daily life. Lords and servants alike moved through stone corridors, their routines etched into the faint sounds of dripping taps and distant footsteps. The castle's management remained unchanged for generations, each class tending to its own needs, silent in their routines, but always aware of the stark limits on water. It was a world where even the simplest act, drawing a cup of water, became a quiet moment fraught with quiet necessity. Days stretched on, each small movement carrying the weight of unspoken understanding that water was a shared treasure slipping away too quickly. And in this shared struggle, ordinary lives carried on, quietly bound by the same limited flow. Then, as tensions simmered beneath the surface, whispers of unrest grew louder with each dwindling bucket. Lord Aldrich, a figure usually absorbed in silent decrees, faced the mounting threat of mutiny, his gaze often wandering to the cracked stone walls that seemed to drain his resolve. The council convened, an unusual gathering, where voices hesitant at first suggested that perhaps cooperation might ease their burdens. A decision was made, not through force, but by appointing representatives of each social class to oversee water distribution. Overnight, routines shifted imperceptibly, labor became shared, patience stretched thinner, yet unexpectedly, the castle found a softer sense of order in this collective effort. What once seemed inevitable, a rigid hierarchy built on scarcity, began to crack open with the slow drip of understanding. It was a quietly ironic turning point. The castle had long been a place where social rank dictated not just power, but the very flow of life's essentials. Now, as the water was allocated with everyone's silent input, the distinctions softened into muted gestures and hesitant smiles. The guards, once stern and aloof, now paused to listen to the petitions of the farmhands, while the nobles adjusted their routines, waiting their turn with a patience that felt oddly unfamiliar. Water, still limited, no longer symbolized exclusive privilege, but became a shared burden that erased some of the invisible boundaries. Each person's small act of waiting, standing in line, holding a cup, became quietly revolutionary, echoing the slow, awkward birth of cooperation in an ancient stone fortress. Calm settled over the castle as the new routines took root, a slow, rhythmic human patchwork stitched together by mutual patience. The air grew warmer with the soft sounds of people passing buckets, sharing stories in unspoken camaraderie, and enduring the dull ache of scarcity without despair. In the subdued light of the evening, the faces that once betrayed smirks of superiority now wore gentle, unremarkable expressions. The hierarchy, once insistent and unyielding, had softened into familiar shapes, an old man offering his flask, a child stealing a brief splash. There was an effortless economy to this understated cooperation, a quiet acknowledgement that, in the end, every drop was precious and equally vital for all. The castle's rhythms had subtly shifted, becoming gentler, more enduring. In the long, languid quiet that followed, the inhabitants of the castle seemed to carry within them a fragile awareness. Shared scarcity had forged something neither wealth nor status could buy, a faint but enduring sense of collective humanity. The blurred faces of prophets and rulers, rendered distant by soft shadows, seemed to whisper that, perhaps, little acts of patience and understanding could slowly rebuild the quiet dignity of daily life. And so, in this old stone castle, where water once dictated strict hierarchies and rigid routines, the simple, unnoticed flow of cooperation had begun to carve out a new, more gentle course. Life continued, tepid and ordinary, yet quietly transformed by the quiet hum of shared efforts, a reminder that even the slowest change can be a kind of quiet revolution in the making.